Dave Isaac, Flyers beat reporter for the Camden Courier-Post. He joins us now to take a look at the post-trade deadline Flyers, Dave, that look a lot like the pre-deadline Flyers, but their big move was to get the goaltender. They had to do something there, but they stand pat the rest of the day. Not a big surprise, but are they equipped to entertain the fans and give them a deep playoff run with what they have?
Well, listen, this isn't the mid-'90s. You're not going to have Ed Snyder-type teams where, wallet be damned, you go out and buy yourself a team that you think is going to win a Stanley Cup. Ron Hextall talked here a little over an hour ago and said some of these teams in the division that were ponying up the dough and paying big prices, he said, I want this team to contend for 7 or 8 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be, not going all in for one. So he wasn't affected by the rest of the division, what they were doing, and he wasn't affected by the Flyers being 1 point out of first place. And, I thought it was really interesting that everybody, the players, the coach, the general manager, has made such a big deal out of, after that 10-game losing streak, players not pointing fingers at one another. I didn't think that there was a high likelihood of that, but everybody else seems to be really impressed by that. So the fact that the same group that lost 10 straight got them to within a point of first place in the division right now, I also pushed Hextall into the direction of really not doing very much, and in this case, no trading at all.
Yeah, I mean, as if casual fans out there listening, they hear the deadline, they just open up the newspaper, they look at the standings, and they say, Flyers, second place, 76 points. Why aren't you doing anything? Would you say that it was smart of them to not do anything?
Well, first of all, I would say thank you for buying a newspaper. Second of all, I would say that probably is smart when you look at some of the prices that these teams are paying. I mean, the biggest one wasn't quite in the Flyers division. The Detroit Red Wings sending Tomas Tatar, who's, maybe a 20-goal scorer, somewhere in that range, for a first round, a second round, and a third round pick. I mean, if the Flyers were on the bubble here, this would have been the year to sell. So if you look at it that way, from the futures and all that maybe there could have been some games out there for the Flyers when you look at what some of these teams are paying in terms of draft picks and stuff. And the next 2 drafts are supposedly by people much smarter than I am with future prospects. It's supposed to be very good drafts. So it's almost like him not trading and spending is an endorsement of the guys that he has in the room,
Dave, what about some of the other moves made within the division and within the conference today? Specifically, the Lightning made a move to get McDonough. Columbus made a couple of moves today. What does that say? I saw your tweet, too. You said the opponents basically are beefing up for the playoffs.
Yeah, but I don't think that any of them are super impact players. I mean, Tampa's the beast of the East. They're really the favorites right now, and for them to get McDonough, I mean, they also got JT Miller, who I think isn't just a throw in there. I think that's a really good piece to add, but man, did that cost them. I think, 3 players and a first-round pick and another pick. It might have been a third-rounder. Don't quote me exactly on that.
Additional second, yeah.
It was a huge haul. So when you look at what some teams had to pony up, it's not hard to believe that Ron Hextall said that's a little too rich for my blood, but it also says that prices were that high for players that I don't think were super high impact guys. I mean, McDonough will probably have an impact on that Lightning team, but you look at what, as you mentioned, the Blue Jackets did. They get defenseman Ian Cole, who's a bottom pair guy. That cost them, a third-round pick and a prospect, and then they get Thomas Vanek, who cost them 2 more fringe players, probably borderline AHL, NHL guys. And Vanek, he's probably going to score 20 goals this year, but he's not a sure thing going forward. I think he's 32 years old or something like that. I don't think that he's exactly a player in his prime who you can count on to really help your team in a big way in a playoff push. So I think that when you see some of those deals that weren't made today, like Mike Green was talked about in Detroit for a long time. He didn't get dealt. Erik Karlsson was the biggest trade chip out there. He didn't get dealt. A lot of these picks players that moved around, I don't think are super high impact. I really don't.
So Dave Isaac's with us talking Flyers hockey as the trade deadline has come and gone. Just looping back to the Johnny Oduya thing, was that something where the alt deal happened first and then they said, okay, we'll go and do this, or which of those moves came first and how did that all break down?
No, that all happened simultaneously. So waivers all happened at noon. The Flyers knew that they had put Mark Alt on waivers at noon on Sunday and saw everybody else that was available. But then you put your waiver claims in and see what happens well before noon. So the Flyers didn't know that they were losing Mark Alt until they knew that they had Johnny Oduya. So it wasn't like it was a reactionary thing.
Well, in terms of Johnny Oduya, do you think he gets a lot of playing time, or is this more like a move for veteran insurance should one of the top six get injured? Because there's been some discussion amongst Mike and I and other people we talk to that cover the game about maybe the fifth, sixth guys in that Flyers defensive rotation is a little bit of a weak point.
It definitely is a weak point, but I think that the guy who makes those decisions, the coach, Dave Hextall, kind of sees what he wants to see in terms of that last pair with Brandon Manning and Radko Gudas. And I ask him about it a couple times a week, and he always seems to see the positives and not really see the negatives. I would be surprised if Oduya got a ton of playing time down the stretch. I'm back here in Philly. I think the reporters that are up in Montreal, Hextall told him that he intends on using him as an extra guy, seventh guy. But after talking to Ron Hextall, he brought up Travis Sanheim on his own. And I think that he is kind of the one weakness when you look at how the Flyers have dealt with their young players. They've done really well with, I think, pretty much everybody but Travis Sanheim. I think he should have been playing pretty much this whole season. Played 35 games, had a little bit of a rough patch, and then couldn't see the ice. And it's almost like you have to be this tall or this old to see the ice after you make a mistake with Dave Hextall. So I think that Oduya right now seems to be the seventh. And if somebody does go down, it wouldn't shock me if they recall Travis Sanheim and he ends up taking the playing time instead of Oduya. I think that the biggest thing that he brings is he can walk into that locker room wearing 2 Stanley Cup rings, and everybody gets to see that. Flyers only had Valtteri Filppula as a Stanley Cup winner in their dressing room, and I think that matters.
Flyers beat reporter Dave Isaac on the Boardwalk Honda hotline here. Flyers stay put at the deadline. We know they added Petr Mrazek, though. We had Barry Melrose on last week. He said he thinks Mrazek is actually an upgrade over Elliott and Neuwirth. He thinks they're better off in net now than they were 2 weeks ago. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think Brian Elliott had played pretty well for them. His stats didn't jump off the page, but he brought this level of calmness to the ice that I think the players kind of absorbed playing in front of them. They probably would have been okay with Elliott, but Neuwirth is just the kind of player where you gasp every time he goes down to the butterfly to make a save because you're worried he's not going to be able to stand back up. So I think that Petr Mrazek is a lot like Michael Neuwirth in terms of his style of play, but he's not as much of an injury risk. I think he's still kind of up and down in terms of being inconsistent, but he's a guy that can catch lightning in a bottle, and he's the one guy. If you put all three in front of me, I think I would take Petr Mrazek and say this is the guy that I want to go into a playoff run with, just because he can get that hot and kind of steal you games, and that's what you need in the playoffs. I mean, Neuwirth almost got the Flyers through a playoff series 2 years ago against the Washington Capitals, where nobody was playing in front of him. It was all on the goalies. Steve Mason couldn't handle it, and Neuwirth came in and almost stole him the series.
Dave, of the goalies that are hurt, Brian Elliott and Michael Neuwirth, do you get the idea that one of them would be back for the playoffs? I mean, I know you're not a doctor, but
from talking to Ron Hextall, it sounds like Brian Elliott will come back before the end of the regular season. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens at that point, if the Flyers go right back to him or if Mrazek's in such a group that they don't want to tamper with it. And quite frankly, to jump right back in and not get any games, I mean, it depends on when Elliott comes back. If there's a couple games left in the regular season and it's garbage time and the Flyers know where they're seated and all, maybe they get him a game or two just so that he can try and feel normal again. But I would think that Petr Mrazek's going to be their guy for the rest of the season. Michael Neuwirth, it doesn't sound like he's very close at all to coming back. And quite frankly, the Flyers needed him to last a while, and I think he lasted 7 periods of hockey. So I don't think there's a huge trust factor in him right now.
Dave Isaac's with us. Now, this weekend, Dave, I was doing a show out in North Dakota where they love Dave Hextall, and the host of the show had said that when Hextall was a player, that his coach called him the smartest hockey mind he had ever been around. They really laud how smart this guy is and his knowledge of the game. You've been around him now his whole time in Philly. Does that come across to you? Do you look at Hextall as a guy who really is a very, intelligent hockey guy? Because they equate that to one of the reasons why his teams get off to slow starts and then pick it up later, because he's not afraid to make mistakes and then keep tinkering things until he gets it right.
Was this a player-coach situation? Was he filling both roles at the time?
I guess this is when he was whenever he was in college. I guess. I mean,
I'm kidding. I'm saying he wasn't evaluating himself there.
Oh.
But no, I mean, I guess I could see that point where he lets things ride a little bit early because, yes, he definitely has the reputation of coaching teams that finish strong. Which obviously means the world once you get to the NHL playoffs because, I mean, the Washington Capitals, how many times did they win the President's Trophy and then get bounced in the second round of the playoffs? It's about how you finish. But in terms of him being a really smart coach, you have to give him a lot of credit for what he's done with a lot of the players on this roster, for getting this team from a 10-game losing streak back to within a point of the lead in the division. He deserves a lot of credit for that, but there are some things I think adjusting in game isn't a strength of his. And again, he came from a college program where you only have players for a maximum of 4 years, and you tend on leaning heavily on the juniors and the seniors and not so much on the freshmen and the sophomores. I think, again, Travis Sanheim is really the glaring outlier here, because he has stuck by Nolan Patrick. This year he's done very well with Travis Konecny. Shane Gostisbehere bounced back from last season, although I attribute a lot of that to his health and recovery there. He gave Sean Courier a shot at the number one center, and he took the ball and ran with it. I guess I very long-winded answer to that question is, I think that he has some attributes of being a strong coach, but I don't think he's Scotty Bowman either.
33, 19, and 10, then. I guess I would ask, does this roster to you look like a team that is, won 9 out of 10, has played, ridiculous since that 10-game losing streak? They've been, the third-best team in the entire league. When you look at this roster, does it look like a team that is firmly a playoff team right now?
Well, I think you see a team that's playing with confidence, but when you look at them on paper, you probably don't see that. I mean, when we were just talking about that third defense pair with Brandon Manning and Radko Gudas, you need defensive depth in the playoffs. I don't know if that's a defensive pair that many people would really feel strongly about in playoff hockey. You look at their fourth line. You have Yuri Laterra, who has good hands and a good head in his shoulders, but his legs are still, trying to back check up the ice. Valtteri Filppula has slowed down a little bit. Dale Weiss is pretty much the opposite. He can't do a whole lot with the puck, it seems, but can skate pretty fast. I think there are some weaknesses where if you were starting a playoff series against the Flyers, you would look at some of these things on paper and say, that's a weakness I can exploit.
Dave, the Flyers once fired Peter Laviolette, after 3 games into the season? They fired Paul Holmgren one time as head coach 24 games into the season. If Ed Snyder was still around in December, do you think Hack would have survived that 10-game losing streak?
No way. No way. I don't think so at all, and I don't think many people would disagree with that. But, this is certainly a new era of the Flyers where Ron Hextall's the man in charge. And sure, there are people in theory that are in the hierarchy above him, but I think that 99% of the decisions that are made about this hockey club begin and end with Ron Hextall. And because he went out on this limb to go get the college guy who few people in the NHL really knew of or had heard much about, he was definitely going to have a longer leash there. So right now, Ron Hextall's got to be feeling pretty good about himself and the decision that he made to stay with Dave Hextall.
Which one of the hack moves, because you mentioned a few of them, which one do you think is pushed the Flyers the most? Was it Giroux to the left wing? Was it the Gostisbehere thing, getting him out of the doghouse and pairing him with Provorov, too, by the way? Provorov and Ghost is a solid pairing. Telling Konechny maybe stop passing as much and start shooting more. I mean, there's a lot of moves that he's made that have gone right. Which one do you think is the one that's the top of the list?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. For as many weaknesses as I think he has, he's pushed all the right buttons, or many of the right buttons here. The move to wing for Giroux, people ask about that position a lot, but if you look at the faceoffs, he's taken more than Sean Couturier has. So I think the biggest adjustment for Claude Giroux is once the faceoff happens one way or another and the Flyers end up back with the puck, him entering the zone, and he's got the boards to his back. He doesn't have to look both ways before crossing the street kind of deal. He knows exactly what's in front of him, and we've seen for, 8 years here how his passing ability is and the things that he can see that others don't. So that kind of narrows that focus a little bit in terms of what he can see and how he can dish the puck out. If you're asking me to pick one, I think it's more than putting him on the wing. It's just putting him and Sean Couturier together in any facet, because the chemistry that they've built there has just been tremendous. I think that was like day 3 of training camp, and they haven't been split up since.
Can you clear up before we let you go some of these procedural moves, this Matt Reed, Oscar Lindblom, all this stuff that's taken place?
Yeah, so part of the trade deadline, the Flyers have a pretty good farm system too with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, and in order to be eligible for the AHL playoffs, players have to be on that minor league roster at 3 p.m., which is the time of the trade deadline. So the Flyers did that with Oscar Lindblom and with Alex Lyon, the goalie, because, again, it looks like Elliott will come back there at some point in the coming weeks. But it was just a paper move. They're in Montreal tonight. Lyon's backing up still. Lindblom's in the lineup still. Matt Reed was a true call-up, though. Because that happened before the 3 o'clock deadline, he's not going back to the Phantoms. So he's up here for the rest of the year now, and that'll be just kind of a depth thing. And we'll have to see what happens with the Flyers. I mean, in terms of their health, because they have Wayne Simmons out right now. You're looking at a guy coming back, not necessarily at a fringe injury where they're not sure if the guy's going to miss time, and then Reed would end up stepping in. They also have Taylor Lear, who hasn't played in the last little bit here. So just gives them another body up front. In case they need it going forward. But in terms of Lyon and Lindblom, just, like you said, procedural things where they were in the AHL for 5 minutes, even though they didn't have to try and make their way back to the airport. They're in Montreal right now. They're on the NHL roster and will be going forward here.
Dave Isaac, at Dave G. Isaac on Twitter. He covers the Flyers for the Camden Courier Post. Kind enough to join us on a busy day where, the Flyers weren't all that busy, but the teams around them did get busy. Down the stretch they come. Dave, we appreciate the time as always, pal.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.